Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well and that you're having a great day wherever you are, whatever you are. So before we get into a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, I just want to say thank you all again for the amazing support on this podcast and as we transition into the YouTube world. Which, speaking of, I'm actually re-recording an episode, this episode that I did on therapy in audio form back in October. And it's really funny listening to that intro because I had just had dinner with a friend of mine who's also a podcaster and was considering wrapping up the first season of Non-Billable Hours to take a break over the holidays. At that time, I hadn't even considered making a video podcast. I had done some short form reels, but here I am recording a full-length video version of one of my most listened to podcasts and my favorite topic. So let's get into it. First of all, if you clicked on this episode, I would like you to just give yourself a huge pat on the back, like a self high five or something, because it means that you're open to talking about, or at least listening to someone talk about therapy and mental health in general. And that in and of itself takes bravery, it takes emotional intelligence, and I'm proud of you for even clicking on this episode. Maybe you just really liked the neon sign behind me, but today we're chatting about one of my favorite topics, which is therapy, and more specifically, therapy for lawyers and law students. A lot of what I'm going to say today, like a lot of what I say, reaches beyond the legal and the professional field. But some of the things I'm going to reference in terms of statistics and specifics, those things will be specific to the legal field and the legal field in Canada, which is where I practice. I hope this resonates with you if you're listening today. I don't know if this sounds extreme or not extreme enough, but I truly think that every lawyer and law student should be in some form of therapy. That may sound extreme to you, depending on your experience or maybe your lack of experience with therapy. But all I ask is that you just hear me out today, and maybe by the time you're done listening to this episode or the ones to come on therapy, because this is not just a one-trick pony, maybe you'll agree, or at least you'll be curious or motivated enough to either look into starting some therapy options for yourself to stick with or restart if you're currently on a break from therapy. I do want a trigger warning here. Talking about therapy, mental health, those things can be triggering for some people. So please only listen to this episode if you think you can do so safely. And if you're having thoughts about suicide or think you might need help, please call your local crisis hotline or a mobile crisis team. That might be 911, it might be 988, but just be safe out there and take care of yourselves. Second disclaimer, because that's the train horn, I'm going to keep going, because I am a lawyer. Specifically for this topic, although it does apply to most topics I talk about, I'm not in any way a trained therapist, counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a lawyer who's gone to lots of therapy, hundreds of hours since I was about 18 or 19. I tried to add it up, but it's a lot of hours. And I've talked to a lot of friends and counselors about therapy, and I've done a good amount of research for this to make sure I'm giving you accurate and helpful information. But at the end of the day, nothing in this podcast is medical advice. And if you're curious about therapy in that sense, then I hope you find something useful here. Okay, thanks. That's enough of the disclaimers. Let's get into the good stuff. Fun little fact, this is actually the very first podcast episode that I ever wrote for Non-Billable Hours, which is funny because I think it was the 11th or 12th that I recorded in audio, and that was over a year ago. And now I'm re-recording it in video. This will not be the only time I talk about therapy on this podcast. Far from it. Okay, so regardless of my very true belief that all lawyers, law students, everyone should be in some form of therapy, when I recorded this back in October, audio only styles, I hadn't been to therapy in a little while. I had just reached out to my own therapist that I'd been seeing since my articling days to restart some sessions. We had a great catch-up conversation, scheduled an appointment, and I've been seeing her every 2 to 4 weeks since then, and we have worked through so much good stuff. Like, she gives me the space I need to work through things, the confidence to set boundaries, give myself permission to stand up for myself and know I can do all those things with empathy and compassion and not be a doormat. It's amazing. Not that I was completely without therapy and, not taking care of my mental health at all, but there hadn't been anything structured and regular for me in that past little while. And I truly think something regular and structured is the best kind if you're working through something that is really, getting to you. So I put my money where my mouth is, got back into therapy after being out of it for a while because I was neglecting my own emotional health and my own emotional work in favor of other things that also needed doing. Things that take emotional labor can take a lot out of you, and I wasn't putting in the work to make sure I had the shelving and the self-regulation to keep myself feeling as good and as healthy as possible. And that's okay. That's my boyfriend. I'm not beating myself up about it. And if that's you too, that's okay. Not every season of life is going to be the same. You're not always going to do all of the things that are the best for you all the time. But our minds, our thoughts, our emotions, those dictate so much of how we move through the world and how we experience life. And they're also huge contributing factors to our overall levels of general and physical health too. So it's really not something to ignore, our mental health, especially if things feel a bit tough or a bit too much. If you're listening out there and you're already in some form of therapy, first off, that's amazing, and you should be really proud of yourself. And I hope this podcast does two things. I hope it motivates you or gives you a reason to keep going, even in times when you're feeling great. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's just therapeutic to listen to someone else talk about their therapy story. So if all this episode does for you, if all this podcast, this video, YouTube channel does for you in general, is service some sort of comfort or validation that you're not alone, and to keep going on with the work that you're doing on yourself, that's more than I could ever dream of. When some non-law folks picture a law student or a lawyer, they may picture someone who is unshakable, who's studying and working all hours of the day and night with this steadfast confidence and this cool grit, like a Keanu Reeves type character. And before I started law school, that is 1,000,000% what I pictured law students and lawyers to be like. And I'll talk with you in a sec about why that's not nearly the case at all. But I will get real with you all. So I've been experiencing some form of anxiety since I was a little kid. And it's much, much better these days. This might be a topic for another time, but putting in the work and having people in your world, your partner, your friends who are good for you, and lots of other things are to thank. But for about the first half of my life, I thought I had asthma. Turns out it was panic attacks. And unfortunately, I really took a turn for the worse when I started undergrad at the very beginning of my university undergraduate career. I'll just say that my mental health was so bad that when I finally started going to therapy, I went from getting really bad grades, really, really bad grades, to getting only A's and B's. And the split in my transcript from pre-therapy me to in therapy me looks like two completely different people. It was not a gradual change. It was the most severe change in my undergraduate grades. And because of that, the first year I applied to law school, I didn't get in. I didn't get into a single school that I applied to, even though I had really good grades my last years of undergrad. Now, they weren't good enough to get into U of T law, but they were good. And I was a super involved student, and my LSAT score was solid, and no one wanted me the first time I applied to law school. And I know that there are people out there who didn't get into law school the first time they applied. I know there are people out there who didn't pass the bar exam the first time they tried. They had to write the LSAT more than once. There are so many ways and so many times in your path to and through law school that there's the opportunity to feel as though you won't make it, and you kept going. So that's amazing. But for me, I truly felt as though that was the end of my road before I even started. And a very loving, brilliant family member got me on a call with a law school admission person who, to this day, I'm so thankful to him for getting me that phone call. And I'm so thankful to the person at the university who took the time to speak to me. And she very frankly said, in looking at my grades, there needed to be some sort of explanation as to why I went from getting D's and F's and XFs, which is a special kind of F you get if you don't show up to the exam, why I went from getting those to A's. And that meant if I wanted any chance at becoming a lawyer, I had to re-bring up all of that. I wouldn't call it trauma, but I will say there was a lot of shame. I wanted nothing more than to forget those grades ever existed and that version of me ever existed. And I just wanted to be like, but look at my A's and B's in my last few years. But it meant that I had to tell law schools I was applying to that I had a really hard time adjusting to undergrad, that I started going to therapy and I figured out my stuff, not fully, but enough that I would be a promising law student. That meant writing extra personal statements. It meant getting documents from my university's therapy office confirming that I was, in fact, telling the truth about this journey. And with that guidance and support, I got into law school. And it was under what they call the access category, which is for students whose undergraduate academics were affected by, like a proven disadvantage. So for me, it was my mental health. And I had to talk about it at summer student interviews. And I had some big Bay Street firms actually really love the fact that I talked about it on my summer student applications. And the reason I felt I had to talk about it was the same as when I applied to law school, because these firms required undergrad transcripts. Law school transcripts were not enough for them, especially when you were applying for a second-year law school summer position. And I will say right here, most of the lawyers I spoke to during that process were amazing. They were supportive. They were insightful. They gave me interviews, multiple rounds of interviews, which obviously meant they didn't see my past, my mental health as a burden or a weakness, but something I continued to work on and overcome. I thought I had to defend myself a lot more than I actually did through that process. So for all of the crap that's talked about with respect to law and mental health, which don't get me wrong, it is warranted a lot of the time, that was a really wonderful thing I got out of that experience. But I had these two really, I can't even use the word I want to describe them. These two individuals, let's say, less than friendly young lawyers from a big firm. And they basically scoffed at me as soon as I sat down at the table for my very quick on-campus interview. And they're like, why would you even include this garbage? They were kind of flinging my page around. And they grilled me for several minutes, asking why I would even talk about my mental health journey. And I'm not underplaying the disdain they showed me. I think I am actually toning it down a little bit. They were terrible. But I talked about it because it was, a way to describe why my transcript looks so different from the beginning of undergrad to the end of undergrad. And surprisingly to my own abilities, I was actually able to brush them off quite easily, because it was such a busy day. They were such a blip on the radar and not even worth my time to talk about more than I already have. But I mention it because this just serves as a reminder that not everyone's going to get it. Not everyone is going to be supportive of your mental health journey, of your therapy journey, of you restarting therapy, of you going on antidepressants. And that's okay. There's only a little tiny percentage of me that wishes I remembered their names. I'm just kidding. But I wanted to mention this because people like that are out there. They exist. They exist in law. They exist everywhere. And not everyone is going to understand your struggles and your triumphs and your overall journey. But that's okay, because it's not for them. It's for you. It's allowing you to show up in the best possible way for yourself and the ones you love and the ones that matter to you. And anyone outside of that doesn't need to get it. And anyone outside of you doesn't need to get it. And honestly, sometimes you won't even get it, and that's okay too. So why do I bring this up, this really specific story? Well, because we're talking about therapy today, and I wanted to share how going to therapy is literally the thing that allowed me to get into law school, allowed me to become a lawyer, and allowed me to practice as a lawyer for the past 10 years without losing my mind too much. But also, let's circle back to the picture that people have in their heads about what lawyers and law students look like. Chances are, if you aren't one of those people who's super confident and unshakable and all of those things before you get into law school, which I don't even know if those people exist, but let's just say they do. If you're not one of those people before, I promise you, law school is not going to magically turn you into some confident, sharp-tongued, quick-witted individual. You're not going to become Mike Ross overnight. In fact, law school and being a lawyer may bring up anxieties, feelings of imposter syndrome in a way that you've never experienced before, because ain't life grand? When I got my law school acceptance, finally, I felt so good. Literally, I felt like I could truly run a million miles the day I got my acceptance. I felt confident in my abilities, in my brain. My dream had come true. This dream I'd had since I was a little kid. Wanted to be a lawyer, didn't even know what lawyers did. And that lasted until the second day of law school. And then it got real. And I was like, oh no, I need to find a new therapist here like right now, like yesterday now. And I did. I found someone amazing. And actually the first therapist I went to at law school, I didn't really jive with them. And I was like, oh no. But then I did make a request to find someone new, which you're allowed to do. And she was amazing. I remember her to this day. I was so grateful to have her throughout my 3 years of law school. Hi, Rita. Because the minute I started law school and then articling, and then when I became a lawyer, I did not magically turn into the hyper-confident badass I always pictured myself to be the second that journey started. Now, I don't know if things have changed since I was in law school over 10 years ago now, but in my experience, everything kind of revolved around bars and drinking. And I don't hate drinking, and I don't hate bars. But the idea was always like, students need to let loose, so let's have a bar night. And then we were all finished our exams, so let's have a bar night. And students are heading into an intensive 1-month term, so let's have a preemptive bar night. And I don't think in my 3 years we ever had someone come and talk to us about therapy in any sort of constructive, frank, and accessible way, but there were Jaeger bombs on tap. I do actually remember them bringing therapy dogs into our law school, and there was this one named Ringo, and he would like sit his bum on your feet if he liked you, and I loved Ringo so much. It was the best thing ever. But you have to go beyond therapy dogs because, yeah, their presence is calming. They're super cute and you'll remember them for the rest of your life. And dogs are amazing. But it takes a little bit more than that to be able to get into a headspace where you can really heal and be your best self. And you can't just have a therapy dog sit their bum on your feet during exams and expect to feel good every day of the year. And the fact that therapy wasn't talked about in any sort of like frank way in law school to me is pretty bonkers considering these following stats. And I got these from the Law Society of Ontario's website. There was a national study on the health and wellness determinants of legal professionals in Canada. And I know that's a mouthful, but you work in law, so get used to it. And that confirmed what has pretty much been apparent to, I think, all of us. And that's that poor mental health affects thousands of legal professionals across Canada every year. It recorded 59.4% of lawyers saying they experience psychological distress, 28.6% experience moderate to severe depressive symptoms, and over 35% experience anxiety. 24% have had suicidal thoughts since starting their professional practice, which literally makes me want to cry. And over 55% have experienced burnout. And despite these numbers, only about 44% of legal professionals have sought help for dealing with these issues. And only 1/3 of legal professionals who have had those suicidal thoughts sought help when they felt they needed to. You may have seen the article in 2024 about a partner at a firm in the States and a mother of 2. She was a partner at her law firm. She unfortunately passed away after drinking a very large amount of alcohol and being hit by a train, which is both devastating and terrifying. And up till then, she had been working about 18-hour days. And the response to the inquest by the coroner about her behavior and about her wellness leading up to her death by the head of her group at her firm was pretty unapologetic. And I'm not here to say that working in law in general or big law specifically will make people experience suicidal tendencies. But the stats and the stories, they speak volumes. And whether it's causation or correlation doesn't really matter to me. I don't care. I'm not saying all of us are going to succumb to that fate. But what matters is that we as lawyers, we as law students, we as the people in their worlds, we don't allow our jobs to be so all-consuming that we literally forget to take care of our brains and our mental well-being. An amazing way to do that is through therapy. I think therapy is magical. I think it's an amazing tool to vent frustrations, to work through things that are bugging you, and to learn how to healthfully cope. When I was in law school, I was in therapy once a week, and I also started taking anti-anxiety meds during that time too. And when I told a family member at Christmas who's very heavily involved in the legal world as well. But I started taking anti-anxiety medications. He was incredibly supportive, super supportive. He basically told me that I wasn't alone, and many students are on them. I know a few of my classmates who were also in therapy and taking some medications to help them through law school. And then later on, way later on, I learned that a lot of law students were on things that weren't prescription to help them get through it. Things like Adderall or street drugs. And I'm not saying that to cast judgment on anyone. No judgment at all. Law school's hard. It is stressful. You barely feel like you're making it out alive. And you do what you can to cope. And it's competitive. So lots of people will take up some sort of substance abuse. Some people drink heavily. Some people take up smoking. And even though you'll find friends and people who will root for you no matter what, it's tough and it's competitive. And you kind of do what you can to just get through it. But here's the thing. Those feelings of competitiveness, of trying to outdo each other, they don't go away when you start articling or practicing. In fact, they probably actually intensify. So if you don't put into practice healthy coping mechanisms as law students and as lawyers, it becomes more difficult to start them later on. So I'm going to end today's episode just talking about the few reasons that I think therapy is really important for lawyers and law students specifically, but for pretty much everyone in general. In the next therapy episode, we'll get into some more of the nitty-gritty, but I really wanted to use this one to kind of lay a base about therapy and tell you about my journey with therapy and why I think it's so important. And between now and when we come back, maybe you'll have made some moves of your own. One of the reasons I think therapy is so important for lawyers is that sometimes we don't reach out to the ones we love with our emotional stuff. We think it's dumb. We think they might not understand, especially if it's work related. We think they've got their own stuff going on. You don't want to burden them. And I hope you have people in your life you can talk to about when something's really bugging you or when you just need a sounding board. But one of my favorite things about therapy is that therapists are not only paid to listen to you at a predetermined date and time and place, they're actually trained to help you unpack your feelings as well. They're trained to talk about your fears. They're trained to assess whether you're at risk of hurting yourself or others. They're trained to help you ask yourself questions. And to be perfectly honest, they're pretty good at helping you realize that a lot of the times you may have the answer already inside of you. But sometimes, maybe a lot of times, our thoughts and our feelings just get so jumbled and tangled and weighted down with emotion. And emotion is not a bad thing. But sometimes it can really cloud your objective judgment and your reason. So when all of those things are super tangled, it's like this pile of coat hangers in a closet that Rachel Green is having to sort at her new job. And how are you supposed to make sense of it all? How are you supposed to figure out where to start? But your therapist has seen millions of coat hangers in closets. They've seen even worse, and they already know some strategies. They know some tools that they can find entry points and make your way through and start untangling those coat hangers and making sense of it all because they've seen it all. Okay, this is going to be a multi-parter. It's a huge topic. I don't want to rush through it and I don't want to jam pack it too much. So thank you so much for tuning in to this first episode on therapy. It was an audio podcast. Now it's a video podcast, and part 2 doesn't exist yet. So part 2 is going to be a video podcast as well. Just a reminder, you can listen to all of these episodes on Apple and Spotify as well. If you haven't already, follow our Instagram, Non-Billable Hours Podcast, so that you can be updated when there are more episodes and for just, some fun shenanigans. If you think this episode or this podcast might be helpful to someone you know, I would love for you to pass it along and spread the love. But in the meantime, this is good timing because the train's coming by now. But please like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Instagram. Go talk to your therapist, tell them I say hi, and until next time, bye. Part 1. Is that all right?